Okay, so we've covered 2 of the 4, and now we're going to get into the last 2. Okay, so we've done identity and raising consciousness. We're now going to do, what are the next 2? See? Scooby-Doo. Okay, so buffering materialism and the 4. Great. This corner is paying attention. I don't know what the hell you lot are doing. Okay, so buffering materialism. Let's see if this is going to work.
No, let's go start away. Let's go start away.
Mike, get in.
Yo, bro, don't put your leg on.
Whoa.
Sit down, bro. Come on.
Yeah, you already.
Let me do. Please. Coach, please. I got it. Yeah. Coach. Oh.
Yeah, you
Coach, I'm in. I got it.
Yeah, it's easy to laugh. It's happening this afternoon to all of you. You just didn't include it on the schedule. So this idea of sometimes there are things which seem like really, really painful. Like we just don't want to do them. And our instinctual response to these things is like, fight or flight type response. But yet, there's something inside of us also that's awake to the idea or the possibility that this thing might be good for me. It might be a good thing for me to experience. And we were just talking about alarms, right? So like, I was saying that I remember, I think it was during COVID or just pre-COVID, like I'd wake up to the alarm and it was just so jarring. Like, you wake up to this alarm, it's just like wakes you up, and it's like we had this experience that we were both feeling that you just feel so like it's the worst possible start to the day is you wake up to an alarm. And then I realized, okay, I'm going to just try this, just don't set the alarm. So for the last few years, I've just not set the alarm. And it's really interesting because actually, I mean, many of you probably have had this experience or tried it. But I mean, don't try it before a flight. Obviously, that's set the alarm. But on any other time, you can just tell your mind to wake up at a certain time, and you'll wake up. How many of you do that? So how many of you? So all of you don't set your alarm? Is that right? You guys don't set your alarm? So you can naturally, the body will. Hey, when did I say to talk? So remember, this is about discipline here, guys. So it's about introducing some level of discipline. I'm going to get the ice out. So the point is that we have the ability within us to do so many things that we just don't do, and they would make our lives so much happier. No more alarms, for example. But this idea of ice baths, it's become really popular now, right? But the notion of, you've heard of Stoicism? Right, so this has been around for thousands of years and well before that. I mean, the Greeks were doing it a couple of thousand years ago, but it was well before that too. This idea of voluntary level of whatever, austerity, sacrifice, some form of difficulty, stretch, that opens us up to a different type of experience, that enables us to become bigger than we are, i.e. forcing us, if you like, out of our comfort zones. And part of the reason why I'm raising this here is because, remember, this section, this third point, is around buffering materialism. There is almost like a habit that we form, that we kind of just let ourselves fall into, and things just happen in our day by accident. We just kind of have no means of intervening in that process. And that gives us a sense of almost being out of control in our lives. And it's quite debilitating for a lot of people, because we don't feel that we have agency. We don't feel that we can make a difference, that things are just taking their own course, and I'm feeling either vulnerable or exposed or whatever it might feel like. And that's very anxiety producing, right? That state. And the point of many of these kind of stoic approaches, or approaches where there is a level of abnegation, right? A level of kind of voluntary austerity, whether that's waking up early in the morning, whether that's eating certain types of foods and not eating others, whether it's a certain type of practice like ice baths and cold showers and all that kind of stuff, whatever it might be. But it does produce something. It does produce within us the capacity and actually the growing confidence that I can do more than I thought I was capable of doing previously. And what happens in this, the reason why it's relevant to this, the idea of buffering materialism is that when there are these constant pushes driving us towards certain habitual behavior, or driving us towards consumerism, or driving us to do things which in a way we know that we shouldn't, but still do. And you have that feeling like, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I'm chasing a certain type of enjoyment, which I know is bad for me, or is bad for the world, or is bad for other people, but I'm going to do it anyway. But when we get into the kind of experience and the practice of actually, I'm able to say no, I'm actually able, and that's okay. Like I'm able to not eat this meal, and I'm not going to die from starvation. I'm able to not buy this thing, and life will carry on. I then start to have agency. It's a really interesting fact. I kind of try and put it like this and see if it lands with all of you. It's not really when you're saying yes to something, because our minds are always making propositions to us. Do this, you'll have a good time. Do that, and it'll feel good. So our minds are always making propositions to us. So it's not really when we say yes, it's our ability to say no. That's when we actually introduce a degree of free will. Like when we actually can say, no, this is my choice. I'm not just being driven by habit. So in those moments when I can say no, I'm expressing my free will. And it's a really interesting kind of dynamic, because once we can do that, then in situations, in contexts that we have that agency, we can, and this is what I mean by buffering materialism, that when those pressures are presented to us, when those prompts are presented to us, particularly when they're habitual, we're able to say, no, it's okay. I don't need to do that. I know it's not good for me. I know it's not good for the world. I know it's not good for other people. I don't need to do it. Life will go on, and actually it might be better. So no, we don't need to see him again. Many of you have seen this before, because I love Viktor Frankl. And here's a quote from Viktor Frankl. For those of you who don't know, Viktor Frankl, psychology genius, wrote his notes on human psychology during his time at a concentration camp during World War II, came out and became one of the most important psychologists of our time. The consciousness of one's inner value is anchored in higher, more spiritual things and cannot be shaken by camp life. But how many free men, let alone prisoners, possess it? So you can imagine the idea he's making, the point that he's making here is like this consciousness of one's inner value. Now, we can't imagine what a concentration camp must be like, but we know that it's the worst possible situation a human being could find themselves in. So what happens to somebody's inner value? What happens to their sense of self-worth, their self-esteem? What happens to that? And he was making the point that actually people essentially were going one of two ways. Those people whose sense of inner value was not anchored in something spiritual, they found it really difficult. They found it really difficult in that context, and even after they were liberated from the concentration camp, they found it really difficult because their sense of self-worth, their self-esteem was absolutely rock bottom. And why wouldn't it be? Because these are the most demeaning circumstances you could find yourself in. But he says, those individuals who were anchored in a higher, more spiritual identity, their sense of inner value could not be shaken even by camp life. Even in that context, they were able to maintain their sense of self-esteem. But he makes this point at the end, right? So but how many of us possess that? How many of us possess our anchoring, our sense of inner value in something spiritual what to speak of prisoners. And that's part of the journey of buffering materialism, this idea of actually we can buffer that when we have a deep, profound sense of self. In the hierarchy that we did right at the beginning, like when we are at the top of that hierarchy in terms of core, in terms of importance, when we are established in the real essence of our being, that means that regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in, the ups and downs of the world that we all, children included, will face, regardless of that, we can maintain a sense of self-worth and esteem which will carry us through life without kind of becoming, battered by the material kind of situation and context that we find ourselves in. Does this make sense? Yeah? Okay. So, one of the ways that different, whether it's a tradition or actually people just think of it themselves, but essentially one of the ways that we can access a mechanism to be able to, again, buffer materialism is about asking important questions. Now, we're really good at prompting questions. Generally, it's in a certain trajectory and a certain type of question. But we found over time, centuries, there are many, many questions which remain unanswered, right? So what might some of those questions be that over centuries and millennia have been asked and remain unanswered? What might they be? Why are we here? What else? Is there a restaurant at the end of the universe? Very good. What happens when you die? What is love? What's my purpose? Okay, you get the idea. So these questions, they're very deep and they're very profound questions. They have not been answered, as in, they might be answered on an individual level, of course. People go on their own journey and they might find answers themselves that they connect with. But I'm talking about generically from a, as you would answer, like a chemistry question. They're not answered in that sense, right? So there's no kind of sense that they are subjective questions and answers. So these questions, like, you guys said, what is the meaning of life? Or when we talk about identity, who am I? These types of questions, they force us to think at a different level. They force us to think at a deeper level. They force us into a space where we're not just going down the usual habitual path, and therefore they provide a buffer for us. Because remember, when you're in a situation or when you're facing a circumstance that you might be struggling with, then to be able to take a step back from that situation and ask a profound question puts things into perspective in a way that is very, very easy to do and very quick to see a response to. Because we have an intuitive response to that, which is that, okay, what's the bigger picture here? Does it really matter to me? Or whatever else you might come up with as a response to that question. So I think that, we speak in education terms about asking important questions or asking the big question, forming even curriculum around big questions or whatever, however we think about questions. But there is also a place here and an importance around taking this to the next level, which is around prompting questions for ourselves, but also prompting questions to students and helping them engage with asking much higher order questions than typical yes-no questions or typical, like the lower order questioning that we sometimes see. And that's why you see, even in great classrooms, when you see really good practice, you can see the higher order thinking going on because they're being prompted by really good questions. And that's true in terms of education in the classroom, but it's true also in education in life, right? Like for us to be able to respond to that, and then for us to be able to model that to students. So get used to asking questions that are not going to come back with simple answers. Because actually, we like easy questions, right? We like questions, I like asking the question, what time's lunch? Because I know there's an answer. And it's an answer that I'm going to enjoy, right? So it's easy to do that. It's a habit. But the problem with asking a difficult question or an open question is that I'm not going to get a straight answer. And our left hemisphere goes berserk. Because our left hemisphere likes to impose certainty. Our left hemisphere likes to impose, like this, this defined certainty, and it doesn't like the ambiguity. So just ask me a simple question, so I can give you a straight answer. Now, the next exercise that I would like you to do. So, this idea of buffering material, like this buffering materialism, you can think about it in terms of resilience, in terms of our ability to kind of like withstand these really days, right? Like, so this, we've all felt like on the left sometimes. Hopefully not this weekend, but sometimes we felt like this. So I want you to think about, this is an exercise I've done a few times, and I find it really powerful because I did it on myself when I first thought of it. And then I started experimenting with other groups. The reason why it occurred to me was I was in a situation where I was in this, I had an altercation, and I was thinking about my response to that situation. And why was it that what this person said bothered me? Because I was bothered by it, right? So I was like, when you get triggered by something. So I felt like triggered. And then I was thinking, and then when I was slightly outside of that context, I thought to myself, wait a minute, why was I triggered by that? Like, what was it that triggered me? So one is, what was it that triggered me? The second was, why was it that why it triggers me? So I want you to think about a context, and you don't have to share this, so make it as genuine as you can. That when you were triggered, okay, so when you were in that state on the left-hand side, think of a time where you were triggered and you were feeling really just want to punch this person. Okay, I'll give you a few seconds to do that, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Go on, what was it?
No, I was asking what the emotion was. Is it like...
Any emotion. Yeah. Any emotion that you really were either cross or frustrated or upset. It could be upset. It could be upset by something somebody said. Yeah. Okay, everyone got something? Okay. Now the next step in this process is to ask yourself, really, really deeply, why was it? Why is it that this context, this thing that this person said or did or whatever it might be, why was it that it upsets me? Why is it that I have this response to this situation? Now, this is normally how it plays out, because it's how it played out for me, and is that, well, I was upset and I was triggered and I was angry because he said this. That's not the question. The question is not, what did he say? The question is, why did it upset me? All right? So what will happen is your mind, in the first 2 or 3 rounds, will prop up an answer, and that answer will be a superficial answer. So you have to go beyond that until you get to a point where really you feel you've got the answer, this is why it upset me. Okay, try it. Okay, hopefully you've done a couple of rounds in your minds. Does anybody want to share? No pressure here to do this, because I told you didn't have to share. So, but does anybody want to yeah, okay, great. We get a mic. Where's the mic? Where's the mic? Wake up, Akash, wake up. It's triggering me. Okay, you got a loud voice, maybe you could go for it.
Yeah, I think the answer was that it made me question my self-worth.
Made you question your self-worth. Okay, nice. Very nice. And just to, when you got to that, were there any other initial responses that you came up with, or did you go straight to that?
No, I think I went straight to that eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, the initial responses, they probably played out in my head a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I can't remember what they were.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
So initially loss of control, and then finally not being able to fulfill my purpose.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Anyone else? Yeah, at the back.
How was
Powerless, yeah. So it's very interesting. This loss of control and powerless one, and the not being able to fulfill my purpose, and this point about self-worth, these are actually quite generic responses at a deep level. And it's really interesting, right? Because what do you notice about that? What do you notice about that type of response compared to the first layering which we worked through? Because did you guys also have initial responses that were more superficial that you worked through? Yeah? Okay, so they might have been stuff like, well, they said this, or they did that, or whatever, right? So something like that, and then you get to something deeper. But at a generic, at a kind of a foundational level, what's going on there is that there is something in terms of our identity, in something who we, like our own self-identities, whether it's self-worth or what I'm supposed to do, or those types of things, which we feel have been attacked, or have been constrained, or have been in some way, affected negatively, right? And then we get triggered. But what's interesting is that we spend most of our time. So those answers that you guys came up with, they need reflection. Like, you need to get to that space, because otherwise what happens is we float above that space at the level of responses which are very superficial. Now, with those superficial responses, the problem is we are always externalizing the problem, right? So we go through life basically in these types of situations constantly externalizing the problem. But if we can understand that the actual issue, what's actually triggering, what's really causing me to feel how I'm feeling, is much more an internal issue, then something happens. Because in that moment, we realize, actually, I have some control over this. And there are ways in which we can engage with that emotion at a fundamental level that enable us to manage that. So now, previously, until I get to that state, I'm thinking, I don't have any control as to how I'm feeling here. I don't have any way in which to engage with this because it's an externalized problem. I can't control what you say or what you do, right? And as the saying goes, but I can control my response. So this process of kind of helping us to buffer materialism, this is a similar process that we're going through, that we actually try and understand what is going on for us at a deeper level. And that involves good questions, right? It involves good questions because most of us, are used to the same old questions. But for us to get deeper, we need to be able to get good at asking better questions. And that means like being clear as to what, in this example, is affecting us, actually is the cause of affecting us. So, and the reason why I put the traffic lights up there, just to wrap this up, we won't go into this in great detail, but there are so many ways and mechanism tools that we can help ourselves in being able to respond to these types of situations. And the traffic light one is just you've probably all seen it before, but just to remind you, it's a dead easy, real simple, nice way that you can keep in your mind, where essentially the red light tells you to, right? There's something going on here. My response here is not who I am. My response here is kind of this other side of me, which I know is my lower consciousness, my state of consciousness, which is not what I'm proud of. And I know that I'm responding to something which is at a superficial level, I'm externalizing the problem. At that moment, it helps for us just to actually pause, just to stop. Because once we engage with that, it's a downward spiral. Because once you engage with that type of energy, it's really hard to stop the domino effect. Because one thing will lead to another, not least the other person's response to you, right? So it does go down a certain trajectory, and we're better off just pausing. The amber is essentially, I'm in this context, and I'm not entirely sure, so I'm going to just pause and wait for a moment, and just reflect on, am I ready to go? And that's the green. And the green is like just getting used to, and I asked you to do the exercise about what good consciousness looks like. Because once you can really identify and feel what it feels to be like in that state, then we know what green is like, right? Because when I'm in green, then I'm good to go. I can respond. Just like for those of you who've got children, there are moments where we need to express anger, or moments where we need to express, some form of discipline, right? So Now, in those moments, and there was like a lesson I learned too late, actually. I wish I'd learned it earlier. But I understood a few years into parenthood that when I am totally in control of my own emotions, my own anger, the effectiveness of my disciplining of my children is a zillion times higher. And when I'm not in control, there is something in that interaction which obviously the child picks up and triggers them. And then it just goes down it just goes from bad to worse. And this is such a simple, I mean, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, I should know better. Like, I'm an educated person, I'm in education, I should know how to deal with kids better. But we are sometimes, because we're not used to a self-reflective approach to these types of things often, we just go with the flow. So I just go with however I'm feeling, and that must be good because that's who I am and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, actually, there's more sides. There's more dimensions to that than just a simplistic binary one. So that's the traffic lights, and I think hopefully you could use that. But I mean, in conversations and discussions kind of going forward, I'm sure there are lots of things that you guys have tried and experienced, and ways in which maybe in your own school context you could actually share in staff meetings, ways that you can engage with that others could learn from. So that's raising consciousness. The next one I'm going to go on to is, what's the time? So 11:30, yeah. So I'm going to give you a 5-minute break, which you can take in here, because we'll start really on time. And because I want to leave the last 10-15 minutes of the session for just an open forum, that if anyone wants to share or ask questions that are built up over what I've been speaking about this morning. Is that okay? All right, so just take 5.